businesses, they make lots of money in lots of different ways. And, for us, for the future, that's why we believe in Bitcoin, and because we think it's the very, very best asset that the world's ever seen. So would we prefer to hold our spare cash in pounds or in, this investment, that investment? It's picking the commodity that we believe in the very, very most, and aligning ourselves with that for the long term.
Andrew, thank you very much for joining me. It must be a whirlwind of a week for you. As we come up, well, this episode will be going out as your company goes public. Did you ever, let's rewind a little bit. When you started Smarter Web back in 2009, did you ever imagine that this day would actually come?
Yeah, so it's been a very busy week. Busy 4 months, actually. Sort of no is the short answer, but when I set up the Smarter Web company, I had left a company called Hargreaves Lansdown, and I worked there for 10 years. And probably 4 years before I left HL, we listed that on the stock market. So I've been through the process before. I'm very grateful of going through that process as well, because, I was a smaller shareholder there. So when I set up my business, I had visions of how we could grow it, and we've been, fairly successful with that. It's very profitable, recurring revenue, good number of websites, all the clients like us, all this sort of stuff. So I thought we could make it successful, but I don't think I ever thought that it would be a business that would list on a stock market. So, fast forwarding, 15 years after setting it up, it's really cool, but it's quite surreal in that regard. That said, I do think that we've got all the elements right. We've got a great team. We've got a good strategy. We're established because, the business has been trading for 15 years. So, when I look at a lot of smaller companies, to me, it seems, quite exciting, as an investor, not as the CEO. But, arguably, if you believe in digital assets, technology, web design, and so forth, not as risky as a lot of opportunities. So, it's pretty cool.
It's as I was forming the questions, I was looking and doing a little digging, and obviously I found that it was founded in 2009, and I was like, that's quite fitting. That you founded your company in 2009, and Bitcoin was also started in 2009.
Yeah, I've got another good one for you actually on that regard. So everyone thinks that the birthday of the guy that invented Bitcoin, so say, is the 5th of April. That's deemed, to us Bitcoiners, that's deemed to be the date. And my birthday is the 5th of April as well. So there you go.
Oh, wow. That is
cool, hey? That is also the last day of the tax year as well. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
everything's aligning. It's like everything on this journey so far, this last 4 months, everything seems to have aligned quite nicely. And, maybe that tells you that everything's going to be okay. I'm a big believer in fate, doing good, then good things will happen to you and all that sort of stuff. And, there's even in that little thing that we've just talked about there's a few things aligning, aren't there?
Yeah. And it's and I think a lot of people listening, when this goes out, will be feeling that it's such a nice feeling to have a UK company, actually adopting a Bitcoin strategy and going public with it. And it's because everyone's been looking at strategy and other companies out with. I've had quite a few of them on the podcast and chatting. But how you talked a little bit about the process there of getting to this point. I can imagine it's been quite a roller coaster to actually getting to where we are today over the last four months, as you said.
Yeah, so I first invested in strategy, formerly MicroStrategy, 4 years ago, and obviously I've been investing for 25 years. because I started at HL investment company, you get interested in it and all the rest of it. It's been it's been challenging the last few months in terms of making sure you've got all the elements right in your strategy. But we've just worked through all the things. There's been some bumps. Things have happened like the global markets becoming quite unsettled 3 weeks ago, whenever it was. These sorts of things. You can't control them at the end of the day. But if you zoom out and look at the long term of anything that you believe in, you just have to keep grinding away through the day. Whatever you're doing. So it's definitely been challenging. A business like ours, when we're public, isn't really any different to when we're private, just on a bigger scale. With me not owning 100% and multiple shareholders, i.e. a public company. So there's lots of businesses out there that believe in using certain assets for their capital, whether that's gold, property, just equities, whatever really, other businesses. It's just that, we believe as a business that digital assets are where you should, be holding your excess capital. So, in some ways it's not doing that much different to what we've done previously, but just on a bigger scale. And obviously when you're a public company, then you've got other strategies for growth. So for example, you're more visible, you're more interesting, if that's the right word, so it can help you grow that. And obviously there's different ways that you can then raise capital. So a private company, you can go to your bank and you can say, I want to borrow some money, and they'll screw you on the interest rate and all of that. Whereas when you're a public company, if people believe in you, they can invest in equity or obviously more complicated things in the future, like aka strategy. So there's lots of different things that have been challenging over the last few months, but we believe we've got a very good strategy in place. We're very excited about the future, with our core operating business and our treasury strategy. And we're very much looking forward to it.
For people that don't know, because I've been, this is big news in Bitcoin world, and especially in the UK. So I've been telling a lot of people about this, but can you just summarize what is the core business model? And then we'll dive into the Bitcoin treasury strategy.
So the Smarter Web Company designs and builds websites for people, but we do it in a different way to a traditional agency. So when I set up the business, I wanted to build a content management system that I felt was one of the best content management systems in the world. So the whole business has been built around the system, the processes that we use to support our clients, how we sign people up, how we host the websites. Literally everything is built around the system. So what that means to the client is that they get a professionally designed website at an affordable price. What it means for us is that we can handle that business efficiently. We've got a good process to guide them through right from the start to going live. But then also once they're live, they can content manage the website. So basically change the text, images, add pages, etc. We've got some clients that you do very little, and we've got other clients that do loads and loads of things every single day with the system. It's entirely up to them. And then also from a business point of view, it means that we get reoccurring revenue. So about 30% of our revenue is reoccurring. So people pay us basically like a hosting provider. So it's quite a good business model in that regard. We've got a large number of small clients rather than a small number of large clients. So we do that, and then in addition to that, that's the sort of the core part of the core business. We also do other things, like we're really good at SEO. We can help people with, custom development projects and these things. So, we've got 250 plus clients. They're in the most part very, very happy, very loyal, very supportive. And we offer them a genuinely a very, very good service, So if people phone up, we pick up the phone within a couple of rings. If they email out of hours, we get back to them. So, like nowadays, without wanting to sound like an old man, where you don't always get the service that you expect, we try really hard on that side of things. And I'm ever so proud of it. And funnily enough, with what we're going to talk about in a bit with the Treasury management, it almost unlocks capital to grow the core business that wouldn't be there without that other side of things. And, obviously, when you've got multiple aspects to what you do as a business, yes, it's harder for someone to understand. But if you look at most businesses, so for example, Amazon's a good example, started life as a bookshop, then became, basically a platform for selling everything, not even their own stuff, because most of it is in their warehouse, owned by other people, delivered. But then you've got all the other services that they do, like Amazon Music, Amazon TV, all of these things. So it's not actually that uncommon to have multiple elements within a business, trying to deliver that value for whoever owns that business, in our case, the shareholders.
Yeah, when you're talking about that, it reminds me of I did a presentation last year at some point, and I was trying to explain MicroStrategy at the time. I was trying to explain to people what was actually happening there, and I used McDonald's as the example because it's such a great one to look at, because they've got almost a dual strategy of you've got your core business of burgers and chips, let's just say, and then you've also got McDonald's is a real estate company, and
Exactly.
they've got, I think it's about 45 billion worth of property on their balance sheet. I was looking at all of their accounts last year, and yeah, when you explain this, that if you want your company to last centuries, not decades, then you need to be holding an asset that is going to last that length, and essentially building a financial moat around your core product, your castle.
Yeah, you're 100% right. But you can look at businesses in all different spaces. So, one of my favorite examples, not that I know masses about them, but is, the house builders, those house builders, sort of taking the way that they operate to one side, because, there's some issues there as well in terms of how they restrict the supply. But they buy land, they sit on that land for a long period of time, 10, 20, 30 years before then developing that land. And then also, how do they use their cash? Do they use that? I wouldn't do it like that personally, but as I understand it, they make an awful lot of money off not paying suppliers. And so effectively, they're doing a treasury management business using, a different asset, i.e. cash and land. So it's exactly the same as McDonald's. And there's loads of businesses out there, people, they think, this business sells this, but then there's loads of other elements. Take my old company, Hargreaves Lansdown, the biggest investment provider in the UK. They make an awful lot of money off cash, or off converting cash from dollars to pounds, pounds to dollars, that side of things. When people are buying and selling shares, it's a bit of a rip-off, actually, in all honesty. But businesses, they make lots of money in lots of different ways. And for us, for the future, that's why we believe in Bitcoin, and because we think it's the very, very best asset that the world's ever seen. So would we prefer to hold our spare cash in pounds, or in this investment, that investment? It's picking the commodity that we believe in the very, very most, and aligning ourselves with that for the long term. So it isn't as different as people think, and the McDonald's example is a great one because we all like McDonald's.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize that as well. They just see the front facing stuff,
Yeah.
rather than actually what's happening behind the scenes. Um, and speaking of that, let's talk a little bit about that. So when did Bitcoin come into the picture for your company? When did you start integrating? Because I can see that you can pay in Bitcoin as well. Yeah, when did you start thinking about Bitcoin within your company?
Yeah. So I, be completely honest with you here. I've been interested in Bitcoin for almost 10 years now. 2017, I think, was when I bought my first bit of Bitcoin. Um, and but as a company, I wanted to be more vocal about it, but I was a bit scared, in all honesty, about how people that didn't understand it would think if we aligned ourselves with it. Because when you provide a service to, small to medium sized businesses, was what we do, you don't really want to introduce things that are going to scare them. And then we got to about 22, 23, something like that. Um, and, I was desperate. I was thinking, well, people can pay us, for example, in Bitcoin, we can hold that, and that's much better. It's actually not only better than money, but it's also better for international people because it's quicker, less fees, etc. And we got to that point. So what's that? 2 years ago, something like that. And I just thought, well, whatever, I'm going to do that. So I I haven't ever had any bad backlash from it. Maybe I waited too long to offer that. As a very visible thing on our website. Part of me wanted to do my own small little bit to, support Bitcoin and to say, look, this is another thing to a lot of people that probably wouldn't see it. So in the grander scale of things, it's not that long, 2 years. But it's something that, obviously if we could all turn the clock back, we'd do many different things. But maybe we could have done it a little bit sooner if we were braver.
Yeah, and you're right. I remember like the narrative was very different a few years ago. It's changed completely with like the ETFs coming in America, strategy doing what they're doing, and it just feels like it's a different landscape to what it was a couple of years ago. So
Yeah,
it's
a lot
very
of years for sure. Like nobody can argue in the last 1 year, but the last 2 years is when things have changed. And I think when I first started thinking that we needed a company doing this, round about 2 years ago, which is when I started thinking that the UK should have a company similar to us. Um, I think it probably would have been a lot harder to get the support of people, and it was a long time ago in the context of what we're talking about. Whereas, now it's almost like everyone still can't believe that there aren't other people, doing it the way that we're doing it. Um, so I've got absolutely no doubt in my mind that it's a great time to be doing this. Um, and I think we'll look back at this in 5 years, 10 years time, and we'll say, well, look how the company's grown from there.
Was it an easy decision? So you're saying like 2 years ago you were uh you'd obviously been following MicroStrategy for a while, and was it an easy decision for you to just be like, well, can I do it? With
Well, no, no, it wasn't. So it was about 1.5 years of me saying, well, who can I invest in? Who else is doing it? I want to do this, accepting that I couldn't do it myself, and just wanting someone else to do it. That literally was what I was looking for. And then over that period of time, you start thinking, well, why isn't anyone doing this? And then you start thinking, well, if no one else is going to do it, why don't I do it? Because this is one of the sort of the core ideas of all of this is I want a company that I can invest in, that I think will be well run, that will follow a suitable strategy for what I believe in. And obviously, without being too cheesy, what better way of getting that thing to invest in other than you actually doing it? So, but as I've said to lots of people, to list the company on the stock market is, a small company, it's quite a big deal and it's quite involved. There've been very, very long days for quite a few months. And, if I'm honest, I didn't think that I could do it. And then I spoke to somebody who said, well, actually, that's a great idea. You can do that like this, and lo and behold, here we are. So, yeah, it's a tricky one to sort of to do. And, but I think anyone that's prepared to work hard, that believes in something, it's what I tell my kids all the time, you can do whatever you want as long as it's legal and you believe in it. So yeah, that's it.
What's it been like? Because I had this like when I first started this podcast of I was very like behind the scenes, didn't want to be like have my face out there or yeah, and just be like as vocal as I am today. How's that been going from I can imagine just having like a company that you're just working away on to like I'm seeing your face everywhere. And I'm seeing the Smarter Web company everywhere. And yeah, what's that transition been like? And I imagine it'll just become more and more, um, as we go on.
Yeah. So I suppose I'm quite a private person. I don't lead the most exciting life in the world. I spend most of my time programming in front of my computer. I've got a lovely family and, but, I don't really do anything too exciting. So it's a bit strange and it's slightly overwhelming. When anyone with any business, small or big, they put everything into it. And so to see my company, which obviously won't be 100% my company anymore, go from that to that, and then hopefully to there, is pretty cool, really. We've got this saying, my wife and I, where you know, if you do something because you believe in it and you're passionate about it and all of those things, providing you work hard, it normally, works out quite well. And, this is very much one of those things. Um, it's a bit surreal. I tell you, one of the things that was weird as well was, over the long bank holiday weekend that we've just had, the number of emails that I had from people, emails, messages on LinkedIn, DMs on X, and we've got our company WhatsApps on our website, so some of those as well. All coming at me from all angles, and it was it was amazing to see the support. From all these different people, and I replied to every single one, and I'll reply to every single one in the future. It might take a bit longer if we get really really busy, but I will go back to everyone who gets in touch with us and answer what I can. And it's great, but it is surreal when you think that something that you've put your life into is then more interesting to more people. But that's a good thing, right?
100%. That must be it's such a nice feeling to have. And it does feel like certainly the UK Bitcoin community is really grouped around this. So moving on to the Bitcoin side of things, how did you, because I understand that Tyler Evans and UTXO management are a big part of this. How did it come about? Did you go to them or did they come to you?
Yeah, so how it is over the years. You meet people, and you sort of get on with certain people and things. And I was speaking to somebody that I've known for a very very long time, really great guy. And I said, would you believe it? This thing that I've mentioned to you off and on the last 2 years, I've actually managed to sort of progress it. And I was thinking what he would do is he'd turn around and say, fair play, Andrew, would you like me to invest? Um, and but what he actually said to me was, yeah, Andrew, you need to speak to this guy. So I spoke to somebody that he knew, who introduced me to his boss, which was Tyler. This is, I don't know, let's say a week before Christmas, something like that. And it was just one of those things where I'm doing something at one point in time, someone else on the other side of the world is trying to do something at the same point in time, and then because we had a chance encounter, it was something that would work. So we had a chat. We got on quite well. he said he'd like to, support what we're trying to do in the UK. I think because, obviously they were at the time trying to think, right, we would like a company that's doing this sort of thing in, all these other parts of the world, building on the success of, Japan and so forth. And then we just worked together and we made it happen, really. And over the last few months, he's been, a really supportive part of the team. He's got some great ideas. He's got a lot of experience. He's been there, seen it, done it. And we've enjoyed working together so far.
Yeah, it's so good to see that. I think just there's a graphic out there that's got 4 companies on it, and it's just nice to see you amongst. It must be quite surreal for you to see that it's like the Smarter Web company, you've got MetaPlanet, you've got Strategy, and the one in Hong Kong.
Hong Kong Asia being rebranded Mooning.
Yeah, that's the one. That must be so surreal when that came out, just to see that.
Yeah, it is sort of a bit daunting at times, when you see things like that. But all you've got to do is you've got to get up every single day, work as hard as you can, try and be the best that you can be, and then sort of improve every single day, where possible. Obviously you get the odd bump that comes up, but you take the compliment and you try and sort of deliver it, really. It's exciting when you see it, as well. But yeah, it's pretty cool. There's been quite a few cool things that I've seen the last sort of couple of weeks, and you think, oh Christ,
Yeah, I can imagine that it's yeah. And the thing is that you've got, and I think you've said this before, is you've got a really good business anyway. Whereas it happens quite a lot that companies like Strategy will, when they're just like their stock's kind of flatlining, they're not really going anywhere, then they adopted a Bitcoin Treasury strategy, and that saved them essentially. But you're a little bit different. That you've got a really good business there.
Yeah, so it didn't really hit home until this weekend when I was thinking, hang on a minute, there's not been that many companies globally that have IPO'd with a strategy like mine. Because as you say, most of them are listed companies which then adopt something and they almost say, yeah, forget about the core business. This is what we're doing. And I've got shares in quite a few companies like that. And I think they're absolutely great. Obviously strategy, right at the top of, the pyramid, or, in terms of, respect and things. But we're inspired by these people, what they've done, but we're also trying to carve our own way. So we're trying to say that, we've got a good business, it's profitable, it's got reoccurring revenue, very scalable, all of these things that we're trying to grow. And alongside that, we're trying to adopt our, the Treasury policy that we believe in, alongside that. So, one of what somebody said to me is that, you wouldn't unlock the capital to do that without that. So, I think you have to look at it in its entirety and understand what it is, in lots of ways. Say, for example, you only care about us because of the Treasury management and you're less interested in the web design side of things, then, you probably do need to realize that the web design side of things contributes to the cost of running a business. That's probably where you can then think, well, yeah, that's enough on the web design side of things. If that's what you as an individual decide you want to do when you're looking at our company, because obviously everyone looks at them differently. But then there'll be other people that will look at it and they'll say, well, yeah, I obviously like digital assets. I think, what they're doing with Bitcoin's great, but I can see them doubling, trebling, quadrupling, etc. that side of the business, and that's what that person will see. So, it's not saying that other people are doing anything wrong, because they obviously aren't. Because take MetaPlanet, for example, the best performing global equity in the last 12 months. No one can argue with that stat. But we're trying to do what we're trying to do within our country and our regulatory environment. And that's all we're trying to do. We believe in it. We think it will, grow, be very successful. And we're excited about everything for the future. So that's not saying that something else is better or worse. It's just saying this is what we're doing. And maybe long term, by long term in this context, I'm probably thinking 3 to 5 years. Maybe in 3 to 5 years, the operating side of the business will be far more important in terms of this type of company that also has got a big treasury, because people might deem that that in addition to raising equity to do certain things, or however you do it, that they want that money reinvested, thus sort of compounding what we call the yield. So I think everyone will look at it as they want to look at it. We believe it's the right model, and we're looking forward to cracking on with it.
Yeah, I think the fact that you've caught a lot of putting Bitcoin on in any treasury of any company catches the eye of any Bitcoiner, and they will pay attention to that. And especially if it's a public company that, as you were saying, can access like the capital markets and do clever things to accumulate more Bitcoin. But then you've also got the operating side of things, which can feed into that, which is, as you said, quite unique and makes you a little bit different.
You've got to remember, if there was say there was a long period of a bad market, let's say a 2-year period, a terrible market, if you're an operating business, it may be difficult to raise money at certain times, but the operating business gives the comfort that we can carry on with our strategy, because, don't forget, we've been doing it for 15 years, with things like COVID and all these sorts of, big volatile events that have come up. And, we've been profitable historically every single year for 15 years. So I think, to me, going back to, this is a business that's structured as I want to do it, as I want to invest, etc., etc. It's different, but I believe that it's the smart way of doing it, the smarter way of doing it. I haven't used the one before. You did 15 years.
Oh wow! I thought that would always be coming out.
No, never. Probably shouldn't come out.
I did see somewhere on X, someone was asking, because your brand is black and like light blue. Someone was asking, do you plan to make that orange, kind of like what Strategy have done? They've just gone full whack, with the Bitcoin, even a Bitcoin logo in their name.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't go as far as to say I've thought about these things, at the current point, because there's so many different things. But I wouldn't rule it out in the future. We'll just have to wait and see how we go on that one. So it certainly wouldn't be a difficult thing to do. It's something that, being designers ourselves, we're quite able to change those sorts of things should we want to in the future.
Yeah. So I heard on X Spaces, I don't know if you can or want to talk about this, but I think it was Tyler saying, someone asked, what's the goal over the next like 6, 12 couple of years when it comes to the accumulation strategy around that? And are we able to touch on this a little bit?
Yeah, I suppose we can. So I want to build a company that is continuously growing. So by that, I mean, for the shareholders, in terms of what they see, i.e. share price growth, for the company as a whole, in terms of, its value, however that's made up with all the different business units. I want to be better at what we're doing every single day. You know, and I also slightly longer term, I want to be something that the UK can be really proud of. You know, a really good company that's come out of the UK. Everyone saw it in front of them, and then saw it grow and grow, and hopefully over a fairly short time period as well. Um, I I've sort of resisted the temptation to say, you know, like take MetaPlanet for example. They went from 0 to 1,000 bitcoins in 6 months. You know, Tyler and I have had chats about, you know, how it would be quite nice to beat that one. You know, we'll see on that one. You know, but I wouldn't want to sort of stick my neck out and say that, you know, within 6 months, 12 months, you know, we will have done X, Y, and Z. All I can promise people is that, you know, we're going to grow, we're ambitious. You know, you can see from elements of, you know, our background, both Tyler and I, that, you know, we've done some quite good things in the past. And you know, sort of judge us by our actions rather than what we say above the fact that we're trying to push things forward.
Yeah, and what I really liked is I read an article that was it Money Week or This Is Money around this, and it quoted you and it said, "I'd like to be a FTSE 100 company." People might laugh when I say that because when you're a small company, that's just wait, when you're a small company, that's just listing it sounds I've written that down wrong.
I know the quote
Yeah.
that you mean, you know, and you know, I I think that that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say because, you know, when I look at HL, you know, no one thought that would be a listed business. Then they didn't think it'd be in the 250, then the 100. You know, then it became, you know, a private company again this year because it got bought out. You know, when I set up my business, you know, everyone said that's a very competitive space. You know, you're not, you know, you might not be able to make a success of that. You know, lots of people at the time, they said to me, you know, sure, you want to set up your own business? Why don't you just, you know, go and get a job working for someone else? You've got some great experience. And,
Get that all
you
the
know,
time.
but yeah, but, you know, you know, things are possible. And, you know, we 100% believe in what we're doing. And, you know, you look at the examples of similar-ish companies in different countries, and you can see the growth has been incredible in them. So, you know, if everyone gets behind us, if we execute well, if we continue offering a good service to our clients, you know, I believe it's all possible. You know, but I won't say the timescales.
Yeah.
You know, I think I won't say the time, but I
I
don't
won't
think we're
push.
talking multi years.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking years. You know, but you know, everything's possible.
Yeah. And I think it's just exciting to have this in the UK because it's always been this is why we ran a conference in Edinburgh in 2022. And that's why we did it was because we were looking at America. We were like, they're doing this, they're doing that. And we were like, what are we doing? So we just not the same, but we just kind of had we like to say a fuck it moment, and it was just like, well, nobody's doing it, so we'll do it. And
Yeah,
it's so great to see because I was looking for companies as well. In the UK, I was like, who can I invest in that's doing this and is adopting the same strategy? So it's so nice to see that you've just done it, and yeah, it's such a I think yeah, it just makes it when the UK is very negative towards Bitcoin, to have this story come out at this time is like such big news. And yeah, I'm very grateful that you've actually put the work in and actually making this happen.
well, I appreciate that. You know, like if you think that, you know, if everyone in the country did something big or small, you know, to make everything a bit better, things do get better, right? That's how it works, yeah. You know, and you know, this is one of the things that I can try and do to sort of move things forward. You know, I have a joke with my American friends of, you know, we're going to get some, you know, like the Donald Trump hats, but
Okay.
instead of make America great, we're going to get make the UK great again, you know, I believe that, you know, if we all work together and we all try, and you know, then, you know, like, I know things get tough for everyone in different ways at different times, and things aren't easy out there, but there is a lot of hope for the future. And you know, we are, you know, we're doing what we're doing, and I genuinely hope that people can look back at us in the future and say that, you know, this was, you know, the birth and then the growth of, you know, one of the UK's better companies. And you know, you never know, within a couple of years we'll be having this chat again, and we will have just been admitted to the FTSE 100, maybe.
Yeah, I will definitely have you on when that happens. I want exclusive to that one.
No problem.
I got one last question before we wrap up, but do you think we will see this as more of a, so holding Bitcoin on your balance sheet, creating Bitcoin treasuries, do you think we'll see this as more of a trend going forward, not just amongst public companies, but it's already emerging amongst private companies as well?
Yeah.
And I think having this story that you're directing, you're building, really adds to that and shows people like this is what they've done. And because I would like to see a lot more businesses in the UK adopt that sort of strategy, private or public.
Yeah, for sure. And I would echo that. So whether it's other companies, you know, pivoting that are already listed, or other companies that decide to get listed and do similar things to what we're doing, or private companies, you know, the more the merrier. You know, I think that the more companies that adopt this strategy, the better. I think it's better for the companies. It's better for whoever owns those companies. I think it's better for Bitcoin. You know, the more different companies are doing it, the more diversified it is, of course, as well, which I know is quite important to some people. You know, so, you know, if there's any companies out there that are thinking of doing it and they want a little bit of advice, then, you know, just get in touch. You know, I'll help. You know, I'm more than happy to help if I can. You know, and you know, why not? You know, like, I don't think that that cash has definitely been the kindest of sort of assets for people over the last few years. You know, particularly older people, for example, you know, who then can't generate new cash. You know, so you know, it's arguably, you know, without sort of saying anything that the legal people wouldn't like, it's arguably the best asset the world's ever seen. You know, and obviously I believe it is. You know, why not align yourself with it?
Yeah, it's a good play, and I'm very happy to see you taking action and actually doing this. And yeah, it's a big week for you. And yeah, this episode will be going out as soon as you go public. So yeah, I just want to say congrats to you for getting to this point, and yeah, thank you for coming on and chatting to me.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for talking. And also, you know, we'll give you an update in a few weeks or months or something of how it's going. And, you know, until then, just stay in touch anyway.